Okay, it's recording. So what we're going to do is right now we have our websites. We added CSS to them. Oh yeah, I did some weird stuff. That's why it's right here. Yeah, we have CSS. What we're gonna do is we're gonna add functionality. I'm gonna show you something. We held summer camps over the last summer, and then my younger brother was a part of the summer camp, and he did something cool. Where is this? He did something cool on his website, which I'm gonna show you all how to do today. So this is his website here. And then he has this little JavaScript logo, which you can click and it gets better. So we're gonna learn how to do this, and then we're gonna look at event listeners in JavaScript, how to access HTML elements with JavaScript, how to change the CSS properties of HTML elements with JavaScript. So we'll get into that now. So what I'd like everyone to do is in your projects.html file, and for anyone who didn't make, like, you weren't here before, you don't have the website, that's actually all right. I'll show you where you can get a copy of the website, so you can just start here now. So go to the day 3 slides on our website. And Jerry, Atticus, or Ming, could you put the link in the chat for everyone? And you can scroll to the end. This is the final result. And then you can just, on REPL, you can fork this. So you have your own copy, and then you can edit there. So I'll just fork this. So for anybody who has forked this, you should see the same thing that I'm seeing, and then we'll add. In our project section, we're gonna add that JavaScript logo, and then we will explore JavaScript there. So the first thing we'll do is underneath, so inside of this class called content, I don't know if, okay, you know what, if you guys don't have this, I'd recommend, just to make it easy, just fork this here. So we're all on the same page. So I'll give you guys like a minute to get there, and then we'll start with today's lesson. And in terms of content, we'll be going through the stuff on the day 4 slides. I'm not going to follow the slides exactly, but if you want to look at all of the content that we covered, I'd recommend watching this video or going back to the slides. That's all good stuff. Okay, so what we're going to do is, actually, this is a pretty small thing, but I noticed that the JavaScript file is in the body tag. So we can actually move it up to the head, and then, because it's a better place for it to be. And then I'll show you when we write our JavaScript code, we have to add an event listener to only start running the code once all of the HTML elements have been loaded onto the page. So we have this. So I guess let's begin now. So what I want us all to do is create, this is going to be an image. So just by yourself, find a JavaScript logo somewhere. And then what we're going to do is on REPL, we're going to upload this file. So just select it. And then let's rename it to something like js-logo.png. That's what we're all doing right now. So we have this image that we can work with. And then going into projects.html, we are going to create an HTML element, image element, with the source being that image. Does anyone remember or know how to create an image in HTML? You could like type it in the chat, or you can unmute and speak out loud. Okay, so here's the basic format. So this is in HTML. HTML is composed of closing and starting and closing tags, and that's how you define elements. Image, since it doesn't, and then whatever's between the tags is the inner text, and that's the text that you see on the website. Since images don't have any text, they're self-closing tags, so we can write them as such. And then inside of the start tag, you can put attributes, which is like more information about that element. So for this image, we want to display the image that we specified, jslogo.png. So we're going to source that there. And then if we've done it right, we should see this big JavaScript logo. So yeah, just everyone try this, type in this code, and then check if you can see the JavaScript logo. And I don't want to go too fast. I feel like last time I may have gone too fast and left some people behind. So when you finish this step, I'd like you to raise your hand. And then once most of us have raised our hands, then I'll move on to the next step. And what I'll also do is I will put, I'm going to put the link to the REPL I'm working on in the chat. So if the screen share isn't working for you, or if you want to actually copy pieces of code, then you can do it from here. So yeah, so no one's raised their hand. So does that mean that you need more time, or you're just not following? Like in that case, I'll just continue, and then you all can watch the video later if you want to do it yourself. But is there anyone who'd like me to wait? Okay, then let's proceed. I'll go through it all, I'll explain it all. You don't have to follow along now, just try to understand it. And then if you do want to follow along, then you can always watch this video later. So we've made an image here. We have this image. The next step is, so that's the HTML. HTML is for the structure and elements of our page. CSS is for styling those elements. How did they look visually? And then JavaScript is for making things move and things have functionality. So we have the HTML part down. So now we need the CSS. So what ideally we want to do is set this image so that it's small at the beginning and it's in the center of the page. So how we can do that is we give this image an ID so we can access it in CSS. So let's call it JS logo. So this is our CSS file. So to access, to style an ID, so what CSS looks like is you select this is the selector here, and then you put properties. So we have selected, we're looking for an element which has an ID of JS logo. So here is something in CSS you can do. You can make something position absolute, and then it's positioned in relation to, in this case, the web page. So, and actually before we move further, let's just set like the width is equal to 100 pixels and the height is 100 pixels. So what we should see is our image is pretty tiny now. Now, let's look at how position absolute can actually, how you can actually use it. So you can specify, I want my element to be 0 pixels from it to the top and 0 pixels from it to the left. And then we'll see our image goes all the way to the top of our web page like that. And then Also, we could do like 100% from the like left. We could also do like a right 0. And then as you expect, our logo goes all the way there. Now, if we want to get it into the middle, what we could do is we could say like 50 in CSS, the width of the entire web page is 100 VW and the height is 100 VH. So if we want to put it in the middle, we could say from the top, we want to be the 50 VH from the top, and the left, we want to be 50 VW. So if we look at this, that looks pretty good. It's actually not centered though, and we can see this if we increase the size of this logo. You will see that it's actually not in the center, but this corner is in the center. So that's how CSS positioning works. It's based off of the corner, not the center. So if we want to move this image to the center, we can use this property. So we could do transform, translate, -50%, -50%. So what this is doing is translate is used to move the element. These two numbers represent the movements in the X and Y percentage. And then the percentages are, it's the percentage of the elements actually width and height. So we're going to move 50% of the elements width to one side, 50% of the elements height up. So that's how we can actually position the center in the center. So you'll see this is actually in the center now. And we can turn this back to 100 pixels. So that's why if you have a web page, you want to position something in the center, this is a great way to do it if you want it to be absolute. And then we may also look into the future. What are some ways of doing it without absolutely positioning an element? Because one thing about positioning something absolute is you take it out of the flow of the web page. So you can see we had this text here. Automatically, this text is underneath our header because that's just how the document flows. But absolute is like one level above that. You could see when we positioned it in the top left corner, it didn't like go underneath the navigation bar or go like underneath the text. It was just like absolutely placed on top. So a lot of times we don't actually want that behavior, but right now this is what we do want. So we have the CSS and we're ready to move to the JavaScript. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick we're going to learn about some concepts. So first is an event listener. So in JavaScript, there are events which happen. What an event listener does is it basically says when you can write a function with an event listener. So you can say, whenever this event happens, I want you to run the function. So we can write like, we can create an event listener so that whenever this box is clicked, whenever the logo is clicked, we can run a function, and that function can make the logo larger. So we're going to get our first exposure to event listeners in a piece of code you'll have to include for all of your JavaScript files. So it looks like this. Document.add event listener. This is what it'll look like when you write event listeners. Now this method of document takes two parameters. First is the name of the event. So that's for click. In this case, we want DOM content loaded, which basically says when the HTML or the DOM document object model is finally loaded, then we want to start running JavaScript, because when we write our JavaScript code, we're going to be trying to access HTML elements. But if they don't exist, our code won't work. So we need to wait till they exist before we can start accessing them. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to access this element. So we're going to do const, let's call it logo for simplicity. And the way to access an element in JavaScript, get an HTML element, the easiest way is to get it by its ID. So the name of its logo, ID is JS logo. And so we've given it an ID, and IDs are unique. Only one element can have that ID on a page. So it's very easy to look through all of the HTML elements and then find the one which has that ID. With classes, it's a lot harder because multiple elements do have the same class. So you can access elements by class, but the keyword is elements, not element. You would get a list of all of the elements with that class. So now that we have this, what can we do? I'm going to create another. So this paragraph here, let's give it an ID of paragraph. And we'll practice with that too. So const paragraph. So we have that. And then what the first thing I want you all to try or just pay attention to is we can change the inner text of our element. So I'll change it to this was changed with JavaScript. So this is the inner text. And now it says this was changed with JavaScript. We are changing the literal inner text between these two tags. We are setting it to a different value with JavaScript. This is a really cool thing which you can do in JavaScript. You can programmatically change the text of elements on your web page. We won't be needing this. Yeah, I'll just keep this. But yeah, that's the first big thing. Now the second thing we're going to do is we are going to create an event listener for our element. So now that we have the element like logo, so that we have got the element by ID, you notice here we put in an event listener on document. So whenever it checks that whenever this event happens for this element, then run the event listener. So what we can do is if we do logo.addEventListener, and then we put the first parameter as click, that's the name of our event. And then we can just use an arrow function as a callback. This will check whenever logo is clicked, then we are going to, just to test that it's working, I'm going to console.log click. So what we can see here is click this in the console, we have click. So it's working. And if I click anything else, it doesn't. Okay. And an important thing we should do is what we're doing with script.js, this is being included in all of our HTML files. And because this is general. So what we should either do is we should remove script.js from the other files, or we should create a new one. So just in the interest of time, I'll just create logo.js. We'll just move this stuff over. And then we have to source it here so the HTML file can use it. So that's what you want to be careful when you are writing JavaScript, and make sure that you do source it, or else it won't be used. So we can see we click it and that works. So the next thing we'll get into is how do you edit something's CSS properties with JavaScript? So here's what that looks like. So whenever a logo is clicked, and let's make a variable called, I'll use let because we want to change it, let size. And right now, remember, we set the size at 100. So every time it's clicked, I want to increment size by, let's say 10. So you can do plus equals 10. And then the next thing we'd want to do is actually reflect these changes in the DOM. So if we want to change the style of logo, this is what it looks like, logo.style. And then we put the CSS property, and they'll all be in snake case. So style is just a big object which contains all of the CSS properties. And if we change it here, then it'll change in the DOM. So we want to change the height. So we could do style.height, and then we could set this equal to, well, size. Like now, like if we clicked it once, it'd be 110. And then that's good. But remember, in CSS, the width isn't 100, but it's 100 pixels. We have to give it a unit. So we could use template literals, which is just a fancy way of combining, like interpolating variables into strings. So basically the value of size will be here and then pixels is here. And we can do the same thing for our width as well. So let's test this. This should work. So we click this, it gets a little larger. That's great. It's gonna, because it is position absolute, it's just gonna go over everything. So yeah, that's basically what we're gonna cover today. This is your introduction to using JavaScript in the DOM, accessing HTML elements. What I would recommend is if you wanna practice this or do this by yourself, watch this video. You can look at our slides are also a great resource. We go into some other stuff here too. So if you want to check that out, like the slides actually show you how to create elements in JavaScript. So we're just accessing elements that already exist, but we can actually even go further and we can create elements of JavaScript and then add them to the HTML. So I recommend you check that out by yourself if that's something you're interested in. And yeah, once again, we do have the hackathon, so we will be giving you a sign up like form next time. And then so what I would start, like in the meantime, if you want to compete in a team, teams can be of size 1 to 4. You can talk to some of your friends, create a team. If you need help with creating a team, you can email us and we'll help you find a team. And yeah, that's basically it for this meeting. Thank you all.
So there is a $100 prize in the hackathon. Don't forget that.
Who's funding it?
We are.
Well,
actually,
we're asking companies. So there's a company called United Layer. They're gonna sponsor us, and then they're gonna give us a nice server for our website as well. But yeah, we're also gonna reach out to more companies in the future, but they will be our primary sponsor for this hackathon.
Very cool.
Thanks. Okay, bye everyone.